So anyways, I looked over and I saw this absolutely beautiful lady and blonde hair, and she had these really big eyes, and she was hung up in this mangrove. I kind of looked away, like thinking, is there something going on? Did I eat something earlier or something, and I'm seeing things. I looked at her and she kind of looked at me, and I could tell she was kind of in fear. I just casually just kept moving a little closer and a little closer, and letting her know that I wasn't gonna hurt her or anything. And suddenly this blue light comes down and I'm on the ship. And at that moment, there were 6 of them standing across from me. And none of them looked like they're real happy to see me. They put me in this room and I was like 3 feet from this being, and it was kind of a spider looking thing. And I was petrified. I was afraid of this being. Just like when I got in there, it was like, oh my God, I was scared to death. I didn't want to move. Yeah, I knew completely that I was completely safe. To move from here to the ship or from the ship to here, they don't need fuel or anything like that. And so I take a step into my hallway, and the next step, I'm on the ship. Each plane of existence that we are on, there's multiple dimensions, but we have to realize too, there's also multiple planes of existence. Each plane of existence has multiple dimensions. Those dimensions are an aspect of oneself. So that would be a life. And it's not only the human one, it could be ethereal, it can be angelic, it can be so many different things. Almost your mind, it starts to explode at how many places we are at the same time. That's why there is no time.
I am absolutely thrilled about having this guest on today for a couple of reasons. Number one, because you are in for a real treat to hear his story about his encounter and relationships that he has developed with an ET race. And trust me when I tell you, you do not want to miss this. And you will want to stay tuned for the entire episode because the information that he is sharing is fascinating. But secondly, the other reason I'm very excited and honored to have him speak with us today is because he is passionate about saving children from child sex slavery to the degree that he has even developed his own nonprofit organization and physically goes out on missions with his team to save these children and has rescued to date over 3,500 children. The story he's going to share with us is nothing less than fascinating. In 2022, he made accidental contact by rescuing an extraterrestrial female from a swamp while hiking in a jungle in Florida. This led him on a journey to connect with this ET race that is 5,000 years more advanced than us, called the plejarendiaries, where he visited their lab ship numerous times and developed a relationship with this team that he now refers to as his family. And as I mentioned, he is also founder and recipient of many awards for his charity called the Quest ECSS, Ending Child Sex Slavery. So we have a lot to talk with him today about, and his name is Zaysan. He goes by the name of Z. So welcome, Z. I appreciate you being here so much to share your story, and I'm really excited to talk with you.
Yeah, me too. This will be fun.
It took me a while to compile all the questions I have because I just have so many questions for you. And first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here to share your story. As I've said in previous interviews with other contactees, I just think having this information out there and sharing these stories are so important. I do feel like we're on the precipice of open contact. So I feel like getting this information out is just a really important thing for people to hear. And it will hopefully really trigger some people into the awareness that this is where we are in the history of our planet. So thank you so much for being here. And just to get started, I think let's just start at the beginning. Can you tell us where and when did this take place for you, this experience that you had, and how is it that you came into contact with a female ET?
Well, it's kind of funny because I go down to the glades here, and we're like 100 miles from anything, and we train soldiers to become warriors, and they enter the contract field, military contracting field. And a lot of times when I got free time, I'll just take a walk, and I go, and the other guys think I'm crazy, but I just go out in the swamp. And to me, it's like, it's untouched. It's just pure nature. And I see so much beauty in it. And, some of the smells aren't so good, but others are. And so anyways, I took a walk, and I usually follow some of the game trails and see what's out there and stuff. And I'm walking along, and I see something out of the corner of my eye, and it didn't fit because, like I say, we're 100 miles from anything. It's in the swamp. Nobody goes in the swamp. And there's this bright blue sticking out, and it's near a mangrove tree. And if you don't know what a mangrove tree, it's kind of like the roots are out of the ground and they're big, and everything around it is what we call the suck. You step in it, you go down to your knees. And so, anyways, I looked over and I saw this absolutely beautiful lady and blonde hair, and she had these really big eyes, and she was hung up in this mangrove. And so what I looked at it, and I kind of looked away, like thinking, did I smell something? Is there something going on? Did I eat something earlier or something? And I'm seeing things, but I just stuck with it anyway. And I noticed that she was hung up in there, and I looked at her, and she kind of looked at me, and I could tell she was kind of in fear. And I kind of just thought through the process that, like, if there's an animal out there hung up, I would release it, right? And so I just casually just kept moving a little closer and a little closer, and letting her know that I wasn't gonna, hurt her or anything. And so I figured I'd figure it all out later, right? And so I eventually got fairly close, and I started using like hand gestures about how she's caught up into that, and that I would help her. And then I pull out my knife. I always carry a knife, and I showed her and kind of examined it while letting her see what was going on. And then I laid it next to her, where she kind of moved back at first, but I just set it there. And then I kind of encouraged her to pick it up, and she did. And she looked at it and stuff. And then when she set it back, she was watching me the whole time. And so then I moved in a little closer, and then I kind of explained what I would do with it. And, it was very slow, and she was I was building trust with her. And anyways, I got her freed, and then helped her out of where she was back onto a game trail. And I noticed she wasn't really walking well. And so I kind of motioned that I could pick her up and take her somewhere where she wanted to go. And so she agreed to it. And that was kind of the first odd thing that happened, other than seeing her there, was when I went to pick her up, she probably goes up to about here on me, and I'm 6'2", and probably, less than 100 pounds wet. Right. And so I went to pick her up, and I almost threw her over my head because she was so light. And I didn't know at the time that they could like change that, the weight or whatever. And so anyways, I was carrying her, and she would point which way to go. And we eventually found this area of a big mound, which I wasn't familiar at the time with what mounds are out there or here in Florida. And anyways, it's covered with shells, not much vegetation on it. And so she motioned for me to set her down. So I did. And then she like motioned for me to get back. And then I saw her put her hands together like this, a blue light come down, and it looked like the sky opened, and boom, she was gone. And so I thought, well, that was interesting. And I said, I don't think I'm going to tell anybody about this. And so I just went on my way. And then it was like 3 weeks later, I'm out in the same area, and I kind of thought, maybe I should go down and check that way, because I don't usually go that way where I had left her. And I thought, well, why not? So anyways, I just walked down that way, see if I could find any panther tracks or anything on the mound. And so I'm examining it, and suddenly this blue light comes down, and I'm on the ship. And at that moment, there were 6 of them standing across from me, 3 men and 3 women. And none of them looked like they're real happy to see me. And then I get down to the end, and Sam Jess, the one I had helped, she's like this waving. I thought, okay, maybe I won't die today. And, because I was going through my head, okay, well, if this would be a great way to die, because if I go upstairs, I can say, dudes, listen to me, man, this is the way I died, right? But anyways, yeah, that's where it all really began.
Okay, so I want to go back to when you first encountered her in the swamp and you recognized she was in trouble. First of all, I guess my first question is, we kind of think of ETs as like magical beings, right? Like we think they can like materialize and dematerialize as they want. So was she truly in trouble? Like, did she really get stuck, or could she have like gotten herself out of that situation at some point? Did you ever communicate later with her about that?
Yeah, yeah. That was the kind of funny thing, because it has to do a lot with her personality, but she could have automatically been out of there, and but she wanted to play it out, kind of like I did, right? And
Oh,
later we found out we're actually the same person from different planes of existence. We're basically a quantum entanglement. Of course, I
okay.
got
I
all
was
the
going to
looks
ask that
and
later.
intelligence and stuff,
Hmm.
but
So
anyways, yeah,
that's
that's
interesting. She was kind of playing a game to see what was going to happen, right? With you, it sounds
yeah,
like.
she was in trouble, but she could have gotten
Okay.
out of there if she had chosen to.
Okay. And then when you encountered her, just the way you described that, it seems like you were already aware that there was something different about her because the fact that you were approaching her carefully and that you were displaying the knife so she could inspect it and make sure she was okay with it. What were your thoughts? Like, did you immediately think, oh, this is an ET or this is somebody from a foreign country? Like, what were you thinking when you encountered her initially?
It's part of my personality, which also led to why I'm still with them. But it's kind of like, have you ever jumped out of an airplane without a parachute? If somebody asks you that, and they, no, but how do you do it? And they would tell me, and then I throw the parachute out and I dive after it. I don't try to think through on a lot of stuff that I just want to experience. It's kind of like when we had the hurricane come in here, the big one last time. Um, I chose to stay here. I didn't have to. I wanted to experience it again. And I knew the consequences. I knew it's not the smartest move and things like that. But, it's kind of my personality. So when I saw her there, I didn't know really what to think because none of it looked real. None of it fit any category that I could put it in. Yet I'm feeling it. I could feel her body and her clothes, but I'm still thinking, this isn't really possible because we're 100 miles from absolutely anything. She's really clean, and it doesn't fit anything that's around here. So I just follow through with the process. So it has a lot to do with my personality and who I am. I don't know.
Mhm.
Other people might have ran, right?
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking, especially if you're unsure, even if they're a human, based on how they look or if they're not communicating with you, that could put a lot of fear into people. So that's really interesting. So, okay, so then you get her out of this swamp. So was she in the swamp anticipating meeting you
No.
specifically? Like, okay, so she just happened to be there and you happened to come upon her. So it was a
Yeah.
true accident. Okay. And it's interesting when you said you lifted her and she changed her weight. Is that right? She went from heavier to lighter, I'm assuming, knowing that you were going to be picking her up.
Yeah. Yeah. And see, I get later in the book series, they're all diaries, so they need to be read in order. I start to reveal what I've learned about that and their abilities to do that. It has to do with the blending of the mind, kind of like what you were talking about, Gateway,
Mhm.
your ability in magic. The things that we perceive as magic, they're all not magic. They're real. They're abilities that we all have access to, but we
Okay.
don't do that because. Do you want to go into this part?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Um, the things that we perceive as magic, like walking through walls, levitation, and these sort of things, they're not they're not magic. They are within our abilities. We are capable of so much more. But the problem is that we get stuck in the brain rather than being in the mind. And the brain is a survival tool and it's an organ. It has its limitations. And when it tries to put things together, it has to use references, right? Well, if it doesn't have a reference, it makes things up because it's in survival, right? And there's all this space in our brain that we use our entire brain. The difference is though that we have plenty of room to put in memories, right? I call it homerization to make it understandable for myself, and I think it helps other people too. But we have all these places that we can fill our brain full of memories of unconditional love, and that is the key to our next evolution. In a sense, that's the only more that we can go in evolution. And as we start to fill those areas of our brain with all these memories of unconditional love, what happens is it activates those things that we have the potential to do. Our limitations is because we don't have that that love, that faith, and that trust within ourselves or our being or our consciousness in order to access those things. But just through that, we do.
Okay, so I have a few more questions for you about the experience itself, because first of all, did you have any belief or understanding that ETs existed before you had this experience? What was your thoughts about that? And, were you a sci-fi fan or anything like that beforehand?
Probably 30 some years ago, I became part of the Table of Ancients, which is invitation only, 10 in the world at any good time. And it was the Black sect Buddhists. And so in order to go through that process, there was tests I had to go through. And they were life and death tests to prove or elevate my spirituality or understanding of it. And during that time, the other group had they knew I had interest in it because I had a TV show down in Tucson that I was a producer of, UFO AZ, Ted Lohman and Peggy Kane and all these people. And it was worldwide distribution, and it won all kinds of awards and things where we'd have guests on there. And so I always had that interest, right, in ET. And so when I was at the table in Mongolia at the temple, one of them thought, well, let's introduce him to one of our friends, and who happened to be an ET. And it was a different kind of an experience, but it wasn't really significant. I treasured the moment that I got to meet these aliens and what I experienced with them, but it wasn't as something that I really was interested in returning to. And it was just another experience along several others, right? And so, so I knew about ETs and I understood that there exist and all that, but I never really pursued that. And with the TV show, that was kind of different. But then when it came to meeting these plejareans, it was like, okay, I've already been introduced, right? In a sense. And so it was easy for me to flow with it.
Okay. And were the ETs that you met prior to this experience, were they humanoid as well?
What I call humanoid is a head, 2 arms, 2 legs. And yes, they were.
Okay. Did they look like us, like Earth people?
No.
Humans? No. Okay. They look different. Okay.
Yeah,
Because from what I understand, there are ET races that look exactly like us, but there may be some slight differences, whether it be the eyes or the hair, or sometimes they're bigger than us, sometimes smaller. What did the plejareans look like? I know you mentioned I believe you said she was pretty tall.
No, she's shorter than me. She has this height, but she's short compared to the rest of them. And I'm 6'2", and she came up to here. So whatever that might be. Right. And then the rest of the family is good 7 feet. But I've met hundreds of species of different beings, and they're all generally in that neighborhood. They're usually taller than us, but they're in that realm. There is one race, I call them the race of children, because they all look like they're 14 years old. And so, and that's as tall as they get. And, which is without, just guessing, a 14-year-old, if you imagine a 14-year-old, that's about how tall they are. And that's what they look like. But they'll be over 200 to 300 years old, but they still look like they're 14 years old. Just like the plejareans that I'm with, Sam Jess is 200 years older than me. I'm 65. So she is 265 in our timeline.
Wow. And what is their typical lifespan?
Around 800 years in that neighborhood.
Wow. That's incredible. It's hard for our little human brains to wrap our minds around that. But I know in the Bible, people lived much longer than we do today, and they were bigger as well. So I don't really know why why our lifespan was shortened so much, and also why we're so much smaller, it seems, than most other ET species. Did they give you any insight as to that?
Yeah, it's kind of like the information that they give me allowed me to kind of come up with that. But I think there's a lot more to it than that. But if you think about it this way, when they have a child or whatever, they don't really have sex. It happens at times, but it's more tribal sort of theme. But when they do more of insemination and then removing it, because it becomes a life after about 3 days, I believe, if I remember right. And so once the cells are generated to that point, 3 days, then they are removed. And then I call it a test tube. It's not really a test tube, but it's this large thing with liquid in it, and they are raised there until they're nearly able to walk. To me, it looks like 3 years old, but I know the age isn't going to be correct. But that's when they're removed from that. So what they do is like they're now everything's about natural law outside of Earth. Anyone's interstellar, any of these species, everything has to go and agree with natural law. And so when they examine the cells and things like that, if there is a defect in it, they can fix that. They can't alter the genes or anything else, but they can fix the issues. And for now, since it's been so long, there's hardly ever any time that they have to correct something that's wrong with them. So if you think of it that way, that's going to extend your life. And then the atmosphere, like when I come on board, it kills all the bugs on my body and replaces those bugs. You know how we have thousands, or I don't know how many bugs that live off of our bodies. When I enter on there, those are removed, but they're replaced also with theirs. And so at that moment, that changes your health. And the way they fix things, they gave me an example of how they can repair things, and it's like through light, and it's almost like an invisible thing where they worked on my arm, and it felt like somebody was pressing their fingers against my arm when there was only light. And so little things like that, the evolution, I believe that they're over 2,500 years more advanced than we are. And so if you kind of think of it that way, that's extending a life.
And I have so many questions here. So just going back to the children being born and the way you describe it, it sounds like they're sort of in this vat, like a fluid that kind of helps nurture them. I think I've heard somewhere recently that humans are the only species where their children, right after they're born, are the only defenseless creature outside of other species, meaning other species, they could have a child and let it just be born and leave it on its own, and it will figure out how to stand up and feed itself and take care of itself. Our babies are not that way. They require nurturing, they require love and touch and to be fed and cared for. So if they're in this vat, is this vat like providing all of that for them? I mean, how are they being nurtured when they're in that container like that?
Well, there's light that's shined on them, different colors of lights and stuff like that. There's also sounds that they get, plus that it's kind of like being in a woman's body, in pregnancy. All those needs are met for them until they reach a certain level, right? And that's when they're brought out. And then there's no schools or nothing. They're just given toys, and they'll end up gravitating. This is natural law. They'll end up gravitating to certain types of toys. And so they'll keep advancing those. And they have like 7 mothers, 7 fathers. And, there's a process that they go through. And during that time, they'll be educating themselves in a sense. Like if you take us, for example, like when I was growing up, tool and die was the thing, right? That was the job you wanted to go to in a factory and stuff like that. So you went through high school, and then by the time you got out in the real world, that job was only going to last another 5 or 10 years because it was going to be replaced. Well, that's not natural law. And where whatever they're training, it is like if somebody asks me what job one of them does, I can't really say because their specialty is this, but they work all the time because they love it. It's like a kid with a video game, or even adults anymore, right? They get addicted. Well, they're addicted to this work and advancing themselves or learning more and more. So their job is basically a little of everything, but they have one particular thing that they like more than the rest, right? And so that's their kind of education and their mindset. And it's all about advancing each other and helping other people. It's natural law. So they never run out of a job. And they don't have a monetary system. Nearly none of them have any monetary systems. And then, they explained to me the difference between them and what I call the bug people. And that's the kind that people are scared of and stuff. And it's kind of funny. They do seem a lot like insects, those types of beings, because they have like a hive mind and they work that way. There is no harm and no friction between the two species, but they don't really communicate much because they're on a different level, right, of the way they think and do. And but they still cooperate. Like they'll go and harvest a planet, and they can only take what will never alter the planet itself, so it can rebuild and such. But they'll take everything that they can to that limit, but it's always more than what they need. So then they'll share that with the humanoid type beings and stuff. Here's a funny story. After they explained all this to me, that they're harmless and everything, they asked me if I wanted to meet one, and I said, okay, yeah, sure, that'd be fun. Here I am not thinking things through, right? And so they made an arrangement, and so they put me in this room, and I was like 3 feet from this being, and it was kind of a spider looking thing. And if you've ever seen the pictures of spiders in a microscope, I mean, that's what it felt like. And I was petrified. I was afraid of this being. There was no harm. And I knew that because I have already trusted my family and things like that. But it was just the idea of being in the presence of that being. So I can understand when people would have an experience with them, all they think of is fear, right? So, but they don't have a reference because they're not coming from the mind. So the partial part of that memory that's not there is filled in by the brain, right? And it has to be based off of what the initial experience is, which would be fear. So it's all fear when there wasn't any fear to be had, right? Just like when I got in there, it was like, oh my God, I mean, I was scared to death. I didn't want to move and that sort of thing. Yeah, I knew completely that I was completely safe and there would be no harm. So anyways, I had to throw that in there. See, I get off track. There's so many stories and information. I guess that's why I've written those 11 books so quickly.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I want to explore all of these topics because I'm just, as I mentioned, I'm fascinated. That's the only word I can come up with. But okay, so when you met this spider species, how close in proximity were you to this?
3 feet.
Wow. I'm just trying to imagine what that's like. How big was it in front of you?
About the size of a car.
Yeah, that would definitely put some fear in me. It's interesting because I don't think I have a lot of fear around reptilians, but I do around insectoids. Like for some reason, that's the species that triggers me. But reptilians, not so much. Like I've never had an issue with snakes or anything like that. But yeah, that would definitely be a hard one to come face to face with. And I've heard other contactees share their stories as well in relation to coming upon these different species. And they all say that there's like a psionic ability that they have oftentimes where they can communicate without words. Were you able to communicate with them?
That's a whole nother story. There's this being one of the first beings that I met outside of the plejarendiaries was what I call a tall gray, right? Because I don't have a better word for it. They're very tall. They kind of look like the creatures that you see on TV as the grays, right? The big eyes and stuff like that in that sense. And it was interesting because I'm sitting across from them and we're communicating, and that's the other thing. Language is a whole nother subject, but we're talking, and it was explained to me that they have emotion, they have humor, but it's really difficult to find. And so it's very difficult to have a communication with them unless you understand that. And so I was able to speak to them and I understood them, right? Because I was willing to sit there and work at it. Later, in my books, I write about, there was this big galactic meeting in it, right? And so you were able to go and visit other species, and they would have a thing on each of their ships that showed you or gave you the experience of their life and what they were. One of them, this particular alien that I met called Navi, she kind of looks like Avatar, but they look more human, a lot more human, but the bridge nose and stuff like that looked very sort of. I assign names to some of the people, the aliens I meet, just like the Vulcan people. They're not Vulcans, right? But everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say that. Well, anyways, their specialty is communication, and she helped me understand how to hear the Plejaran language at one time, a little bit of it. And anyways, that's on their ship. They had an example of that, of communication, and I could choose the being to sit across from me, which wasn't really there, but you would think it was, right? And it was one of those tall grays, what I call tall grays. And I wanted to understand how to get better communicate with them or understand them. And so they didn't have an earth being for me to be, but they had a Plejaran, which are very similar to us. So I chose to be the Plejaran speaking to that individual. And it was like a they had a scenario in which you would be talking back and forth that you could ad lib, but it was about a certain subject, and just a mundane thing. The idea was to understand the communication. And I learned so much through that little experiment, or whatever you want to call it, example, being able to talk to them. And then I intuitively knew more about how they were reacting to me and where their humor was. And they even joke, right? But you don't see that if you can't free yourself of, your program, in a sense. And that helped me too, because I became part of the Plejaran, who that naturally was the tendency of the character that I became. So I was able to reach that, but I could understand in this head what was happening. And then the next time I met those people for real, it was easier. It was much easier. It was still boring and long, but I knew what the reactions were coming both the to and from.
And then how did you communicate with the Plejaran team that you have become close with? Were you verbally, auditorily communicating? What language were they using?
Well, they were using Plejaran at the time, but with it, by the time I had first met her and the time I returned, they knew a little bit of English. And later I found out how, like, all the species that I encounter now will speak English to me if they audibilize the sound, that, right? And I asked one time, how is that? Because how did they know English, right? How can they pick this up so quickly? And the way they explained to me, this is what I just discovered recently, a little bit before and then more now, but that every language has a tone, right? A series or a synchronicity to tones. And so they're able to, in a very short period of time, be able to understand that. Now, we also, when they speak their languages and stuff, have you heard of synetics? It's that, like a metal plate, they put sand on it, and then they send tones to it, and it creates these incredible.
Oh, okay. I've seen something like it's like a vibrating platform.
Yeah. And when you say ohm, it creates this one specific type design and everything.
Right. Like
Well,
a
that's how
mandala sort of a thing.
Yeah. They speak in those sorts of tones. So it's like a universal language. And Roswell, that spaceship that had the language on the side of it, those are all tones. And that was the signature of the name of the race of aliens that inhabited that ship. So, and then what's really funny, since then, I was in this Buddhist temple and I saw these symbols, and even the masters don't really understand what the symbols were on their walls that represent parts of their religion, right? Or their faith. And I know what they are because I've seen that sound before. And I know what that sound represents. And, so it's sort of a unified example. A lot of times when I'm in the crowd of several different species, they'll be talking their own language, and the person they're talking to will be talking their own language. But it's so similar to know that they base all this off of these tones, then they can understand each other. And that's why it's so easy for them to adapt to different languages, even the animals.
Wow.
They can talk to animals.
Yeah, it's interesting because I recently just did a breathwork ceremony. It was a really large event that I participated in. And in order to kind of get us prepared for the breathwork, they had us do certain verbal, auditory tones, like what you're referring to, similar to what you would do if you were in a yoga class. And so what they did was split up this giant room. There was about 260 people there, and they did they split us up into 3 sections, and they had the first section do the traditional Om, and then they had the second section do a little bit of a higher tone, and then they had the third section do a lower tone. And they had us do it like simultaneously. And what was so interesting is it created a melody, which you would think, okay, I get it. Like, you're doing different tones and it's going to blend together. No, it created like a song. Like, I actually heard an actual song being played when everyone was humming at the same time. It was so incredible. So I do believe in the power of sound. I think sound frequency is not only is so powerful, but it's also going to be the future of medicine, of communication. There's just so many facets to what we don't know about sound yet that we should be tapping into, hopefully, in the future. I did want to ask you a couple more questions about the team that you have contact with, which you call your family. So I believe you said there's a team of 6 of them on a lab ship. Is that right?
Yeah, but at the time, and when I first met them, but there's a story behind that too. It was a lab ship, and it was without a captain, and Sam Jess has a destiny, right? But she was resisting it her entire life, which there's several other stories that attach to that. But she was basically a stowaway in a sense. I mean, she has this what do you call it? Immunity of sorts, where she can kind of do whatever she pleased, right? But she kept avoiding following the path that she was intended for, or what people thought she was intended for. And so she got on a lab ship figuring that she could get away from all the people for a while. And while she was doing this throughout her life, she learned so many different skills, right? Which also came to a head too. But so the captain, he was very revered, and nobody would take this job because they knew they were going to fail, because Sam Jess was not a controllable type of person, right? And so, but he took it on just as the challenge. And that's why she wasn't moved back to the ship when I came in proximity, because she didn't want to. So, anyways, but so where were we going with that? There's so many stories.
I know. I'm like trying to keep track of them all myself. So, okay. So let me just ask you a couple more questions about that,
Yeah,
because I want to
sure.
know, we're going down multiple paths. So people
Yeah.
have to just
Okay. I
kind
know
of
where we were.
roll with us on this.
Yeah.
Just stick with us. We're going to go in a few different directions here. So where exactly is this planet? And I know it's hard to say exactly where when we're sitting here on Earth and you just point up at the sky and say it's out in that direction, but what is the vicinity that it resides in? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's about the only thing I can identify of out there, because imagine you're on a ship in space, right? It's kind of like being in the middle of the ocean. Which way is this, right? Sort of thing. And you got to calculate and all that stuff. But if you look at the Pleiades, that's about, I think, 483 light years, something like that. I could be wrong, but generally area that. Well, if you go beyond that, another 83 light years, that's where the Plejaran system is.
Okay. Now, would they be considered part of the Pleiades star system?
No.
Okay, separate from that.
Yeah.
Okay. And why are they here? Did they share with you what their mission was?
Well, one of the reasons, see, this goes back to the unanswered question, I guess I didn't give you, but they're a lab ship, right? And so these people were new together, and Sam Jeffs, of course, being like what I call a stowaway, that was on the ship, and they basically they were here to look at different things. They don't have necessary contact with human beings. They see us as monsters and violent, right? And so they were doing certain studies, air, insect migration, that sort of thing, that they do typically with a lot of different planets. And plus, all these were pretty new at what they were doing, and so that was why they were here at that time. Now it's all changed. They don't have the small ship anymore. They're with Sam Jess has become something a lot larger. She found her destiny, I guess, or accepted it. And now she controls a lot of what's going on, not the political side, but of the people. She's like the spokesperson for the people. And so we have this massive ship that we live on. And that when I'm up there and stuff and visit, that they live their lives there now.
Okay, so they live primarily on the ship. They don't typically go back to their planet. Is that
Most
right?
do, yeah. Almost
Okay.
all the alien species will either live in colonies or move from colony to colony, or which are in space, right? And then, or also, created colonies. Um, but not a lot of people stick to their place, their
Hmm.
planet of origin.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about that. I guess it's kind of like us, like we move from home and we change to different states or different parts of the world, right? So
Yeah.
you have to find the place that you belong best, where resonates best with you.
Mhm.
So I know you've been on their ship. How many times have you visited there?
I try to explain it like you have a neighbor you really like or hang out with, and they'll have a barbecue, and then sometimes you have a barbecue sort of thing. And so it's not like, oh, you're scheduled for Monday at such and such time to be on the ship. It's not like that, or it's not going to come and they're going to take you, right? It's an exchange. Like I'll be up there for 3 days sometimes, and sometimes more, sometimes less. And then I come here and I have my duties that I need to do here, especially with my child rescue and things like that I want to complete. And so sometimes it annoys them that I'm not there. But anyways, yeah. And sometimes they'll come here and sometimes I go there. So it's kind of an open door policy.
Mhm. And how does it work for your vibratory and their vibratory scale? Because from what I understand, because we're in such a density here in the third dimension, it's really hard for a lot of ET species to come down to us. And even channelers who share about the connection that they make with whatever entity they're communicating with, they say that they have to raise their vibration and then that entity has to lower its vibration so that we can meet in the middle. So, how are they able to physically come down to this planet if they operate at such a high vibration? And conversely, how are you able to go up on the ship where we have this low density that we live in here?
That's the fun part because none of that needs to be. It's a choice how we choose to do those sort of things. It's effortless because of, like I was talking about, the magic, right? That isn't really magic. It is part of our ability to do. What you asked was about 10 books, I think. The
Just go read
information.
10 books and you'll get the answer.
Yeah. Let's see. Like how they, in the beginning, initially, I would feel like a static. And so I would know they were coming. And then we got moved on to being able to communicate. They could call my phone, and and they don't even have to pay for service or anything, right? But then there's also sensing, which is just too much work for me, and because I got the phone, or else I can, I'll feel them or they'll feel me, because you really, boy, there's so much here to tell you. Um, let me just explain one little thing. It probably won't explain everything, but it'll begin to create the thought. Like I work with some of these people that I've been friends with for many years that do contact work and help them with experience, and they bring together different things, and they are having full blown experiences now. But it's really, it's beautiful. Uh, all I did was give them a couple words, and now they access it. But like example, when say you go into your sleep or something, and say identifying it, you need to be, you trust the experience that you're having, full blown trust it, believe it, do not doubt it, and love, right? And accept what comes, and don't create anything, don't make it up. But like if you're going to sleep or you're meditating and suddenly you start to see a being or something like that, or you're in another environment, what you do is, there's so much to look at, like a kid turning a kid loose in a candy store, right? Oh, there's this and there's this. Don't do that. If you see a being, go to that being, give an absolute eternity to experience with that being. And you, I mean, what will happen is all that other stuff will be part of that. But if you look at every little item separately, you'll miss what the real experience is about, and that is another life or a being. And if you give an eternity to that being, of course, it's probably not going to last you a lifetime or nothing, but in a sense, it will. But what will happen is you'll be able to have a full interchange with that being, and whether it be whatever type of form. Now that's one part of it, and then another part, like when to move from here to the ship, or from the ship to here, or even the ship to another place, right? They don't need fuel or anything like that. Like each one of us has a unique frequency, as well as every possible thing. You know, you get a piece of turquoise here, a piece of turquoise here. They got two different frequencies. Anyways, they know how to understand that. And so I take a step into my hallway, and the next step I'm on the ship. And like when they want to move from one place in space to another, light years away, they can identify, you know, they don't have computers, they don't have AI, but they more tend to create life or beings that are suited for specific needs. And so what they are able to do is, let's call it a computer, right? They pick a place in space for their ship to go, and everything in that space that they need to occupy is identified by frequency. And it also can extend that to the future. In other words, like 3 or 4 minutes or seconds ahead, right, or behind, so that they don't end up inhabiting something that they shouldn't have inside the ship or whatever. Anyways, they do that, and in the blink of an eye, you're there. That's how they travel from one place to another. And there's a lot that goes behind that actually identifies and proves that thing.
That actually syncs up with something that Bashar says. I don't know if you're familiar with Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar. I reference him all the time because I just love his teachings and what he shares. But he actually has talked several times about that, where, and I'll not do it justice, but if you have two objects and you want to have one object appear in the other location, it has to embody the frequency of the location, and that the object itself actually embodies the location. Like, it's the location is within the actual object. It's not that you're going to a new place. You're just changing the vibration of the frequency within the object itself. And then that automatically translocates that to the new location. Again, I don't think I did a great job explaining that, but it's similar to what you're describing. So that rings true for me. But I'm wondering, as you are walking down your hallway in your home and all of a sudden, boom, you're on a ship. I mean, what does that do to you? Because that is something that would really, freak out the mind, I think, to all of a sudden be one place and then be in a brand new place that you're not even that familiar with. It had to have been quite jarring to the mind.
A little bit. It was just like when I entered the ship, right? Sort of thing. But that's easily gotten used to. It's kind of like opening a door and stepping through, right? And it's really similar to that, in that feeling. Once the first part is over, the shock of it. But then, you really got to understand how they are able to do that, match the frequency and become that frequency, is because we're just a projection. We're not really here. All of our lives, there's no such thing as time. All of our lives are taking place at the same time. And what a lot of people don't understand is how complex that really is, and I did a homerization of how to best explain it so that I could understand it. If you want to hear that.
And you're referring to Homer from The Simpsons when you say that, I'm guessing, just for the audience sake, to kind of dumb down the idea of it.
Yeah, it's the only way I can make sense. Like, dark matter doesn't exist, or how the solar system was created. It was no Big Bang or anything. I homerize all of it in order for me to understand it. But when I do understand that, then I'm able to receive more, to understand more in detail and stuff, which you can see the change in my book as I began writing to where I am now. But let me go through that real quick, because I think somebody might be interested in that. Is that basically we're a projection, right? And we have, like, for instance, we have 7 lives, right? And we see it as past life, present life, and future life, or whatever it may be, right? Well, they all affect each other, but they're just projections. We never leave consciousness. Consciousness is this great big puzzle board in space, right? And it's got all these pieces attached to it and everything. And then there's this guy that sits on there, who's Mr. Consciousness, and a big lazy boy, got the big beard going on and everything, and all these television sets in front of him, right? Well, for my lives, like say there's 7 of them, each TV has one of my lives on it, and it's like a TV series, right? And so essentially what happens is, to become a projection is we never leave consciousness, right? We're all one consciousness. And that puzzle piece, some of my essence gets put on that, and I become a projection. And that's my TV series down there. Now, when that TV series is over, it's not a death, the physical death that we perceive it to be. That's just part of the process. That projection ends, right? And so everything is returned, but we never die. The way how that's explained is that essence that was put on that consciousness that has returned now, or has never left, but now is finished. It goes into what I call like a museum in consciousness, where it can be accessed at any time. The example I use is like there's this ghost hunter, and this kid was related to Lizzie Borden, right? And he was doing a ghost hunting thing, and then all of a sudden he has this full-blown conversation with her, and it was reciprocal, right? It was going back and forth. His presumption was that he's talking to her from the past, or her ghost, when reality was he's actually talking to her presently, because our life never ends. That essence still is alive. It's just kept in consciousness. And so then once you return and you want to project again, more essence is added of your essence to a piece of consciousness, which is projected. But, that's the other misconception too, is that we see ourselves, oh my God, we have this life and this life. We look at the Akashic record and we have 7 lives that happen, that we've participated on. That's nothing, because each plane of existence that we are on, there's multiple dimensions. But we have to realize too, there's also multiple planes of existence. Each plane of existence has multiple dimensions. Those dimensions are an aspect of oneself. So that would be a life. So each dimension is a life. And it's not only the human one. It could be ethereal, it can be angelic, it can be so many different things. Almost your mind, it starts to explode at how many places we are at the same time. That's why there is no time. Time is just the blinking of an eye, or as Einstein said, time is the clock on the wall,
Yeah.
So
the concept of infinity has always terrified me, because I cannot comprehend something that never began and never ends. If I think about it too much, it actually really puts a lot of fear into me. And if it is true, which we've been told it is, that everything is eternal, then the infinite amount of lives that we've had is insurmountable, especially when you look at it from the perspective that you just outlined, with all the different dimensions and the different layers. And then you talk about the multi-universe theory, that there's multiple universes. And then my other thought that I always think about this is, okay, so, and I've interviewed a lot of near-death experiencers who say, you keep your personality when you transition over. But then what happens? Because does that personality exist into infinity, or does that personality then merge again with source creator? And then does it get splintered off into other multiple personalities once they drop out of consciousness into a body, or create a separate personality? There's just so many different thoughts I have about this that I wonder about, because they do say you maintain your personality when you transition. And if you have somebody who, let's say, channels and they bring through a past relative, you're communicating with that person, they're giving you signs and symbols that match up with that being that person. But then, is that person also there into infinity, or did they eventually pass on to another entity and become part of source? There's just so many questions I have about it.
It's quantum.
What's the answer, Z?
It's quantum. Essence is constantly generated by the quantum. Okay. And so the quantum is infinite. So that essence keeps coming out, or when we choose, our consciousness chooses to take a ride, we stick to one of those pieces of consciousness, which then becomes the projection and creates that life that we perceive as physical being and such. And then, when it ends, of course, it goes into the museum, another quantum. Quantum is never ending. And see, what scientists haven't figured out about quantum yet is that it's alive. And once they figure that out, because they can't understand why it won't work the same here or react the same as it does over here, right? And so because they don't understand that it's alive and consciousness is ever flowing, once they figure that out, things are unlimited, so basically that's our essence, is part of the quantum.
Wow. Yeah, I think we're quite a few years away from our scientists coming up with the answers to those questions, but I think these types of experiences kind of help create a framework that will hopefully get us there. But I did want to go back to the plejareans because I am interested to hear a little bit more about them. Going back to when you were on the ship, did they breathe oxygen like we do? I mean, did you have any issues with maintaining an atmosphere for yourself that you could breathe in? What's their atmosphere like, and how does that relate to what we have on our planet?
Well, so much happened in the very beginning, right? In order to enter their world, in a sense, or be allowed to be there, like they weren't a contact ship. But Sam Jess was interested in me because of the experience we had outside, right? And so she wanted to see that more because, like I said, she's the wild child and the stowaway on the thing, but with a lot of power. And so I had to become what I call neged in order to extend my existence with them. And what I mean by become neged is that you can't lie, you can't hide anything from them, you can't even tell a white lie, and you have to expose everything about yourself. Like when I first got on the ship, one of the first times that I was going in there, that you get a body scan, right? So that you're not bringing anything in that that would be harmful. And so it identifies different things in your body. And like I had so many scars, bullet holes, 9 bullet holes, and a bunch of scars I can't even count, and stuff from knives and things like that. And so they asked me about that. And here I'm talking to these beings that see us as monsters, right? And, violent and everything else. And so, man, it was just like took me back. If I tell them this, I mean, it's one thing to say it, but to experience it is so difficult to just completely unveil yourself altogether and be completely forward. And it's like, how do I tell them, where these things come from, and them not to fear me? And so, this is part of another story, but it'll help explain. I decided to, in order to show them, I would pick a movie that kind of best represented this, and it's not me or anything, but it was like I chose Taken, how that the guy had went through everything to save his daughter, right? And that, it was violent and all those different things. And what I was trying to convey to them is how far we will go to protect our loved ones. And so we go in, me and Sam Jess go into her room, and I'm thinking that I'm just showing her, right? So that'll be a lot easier than showing the rest of the family because they're already not sure about me. And so we're laying in her bed, and there's like this screen across. And as we're watching it, she's getting so captivated by what's taking place and the horror and everything, going through all these different emotions, which they express a lot bigger than what we do. But it was right there towards the end where, oh yeah, during the process, I'm starting to hear all this rustling going on out in the rest of the ship. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they're all watching it. I didn't want that. I didn't intend that. And anyway, so at the very end, she just like pulls herself right up next to it when he finally gets his daughter back. And she's like crying and all this stuff. And then, so she climbs over me and she goes out in the other room. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, well, it was a nice ride. They're going to want me off the ship right away now. This isn't ever going to happen again after they know this, or maybe I chose the wrong one, right? And then she comes back in later and she goes, they want you out here. And it's like, all right, so I take my last sip of my Plejaren coffee and work my way out there thinking this is it. And when I get out there, they surround me and they're all very emotional. And when I do speeches at churches and stuff about my human trafficking stuff, a lot of times they invite other pastors from other churches there. And at the end, a lot of times what they'll do is the laying of hands where they surround me and they put it on, which is always powerful and stuff as they pray for me. But it was like that happening right there with them. They were surrounding me and I didn't know what they were going to do. And next thing you know, they're like all touching me and I just fall heavily to my knee. And I just felt all this releasing coming out of me. And they explained to me they didn't realize, what we go through here. You know, they don't get scars because they don't really get those sort of damaging stuff. But anyways, that was part of that process in order to understand. What was the question?
I was wondering, did you have to do anything to be able to breathe on the ship?
Oh,
Did they have oxygen, and how do they breathe? And also what's the gravity like there as well?
yeah, it's very similar to ours. Yeah, but I'm lighter there. So I've got really a bad back and things, and that stuff doesn't affect me while I'm on the ship. The air is very similar to ours, except for a lot cleaner. Of course, they have help with that, through their system and everything that's generated. It's not like I really notice after I'm there. When I first get on, I notice, but I don't notice afterwards. And the breathing is similar. Even on their planet is very similar to ours. I call it the Philippines, a world of Philippines, because there's just islands everywhere, no large continents. But they have ocean and everything like that. You can smell the different fragrances and nature and sort of stuff. So not every creature is like that. Like the people I told you about, the tall grays, they have a different atmosphere and different gravity. And one day we were to meet them, and they were to move about the ship. And so Sam Jess pulled out this thing to show me, I don't know what you call it, like a little pad or whatever. And what I could see was like, she showed me how it works. And like when they come on our ship, there's like you can't see it, physically, but you could see it on this little thing. Their atmosphere is contained within like a bubble around them, that form fits them. And so they can move freely, breathe freely, everything like it would be in their environment with anywhere on the ship. And so this stays with them, which is one of those things I call PI, personal intelligence, which is a life they create for specific reasons. So, and it protects them, and it can sense things if there's a problem or whatever, and take care of that.
That's interesting. I've heard some other people who've had connections with the Galactic Federation where they say that there's different species, even water species, that, like you just said, they carry their own environment around them. So if like they're a water being, they're in water, but they're somehow encased in this bubble of water. So they're able to still interact and move about like the space they're in, but they like take their environment with them. So that's really fascinating to hear that that's possible.
The aquatic beings I've met, they don't need the water, like not a water bubble. That environment replicates that those senses to the body, and when the body, what do you call it, senses those. Anyways, the way it's created within, so you wouldn't know. It would be just like we're standing across from each other. We can shake hands or do anything. They're not encapsulated in anything that's visible. We don't perceive anything, but they are, in a sense. That's the thing, is the biggest difficulty that I have with these people is there are so many things that I've witnessed now that I really can't explain because it's beyond language. But not only that, it's so far advanced, and that's why I have to use my homerization. And they humor me all the time, right? And trying to help me understand by giving me these little nuggets to decipher that I'm able to understand. But once that I have that, then I can identify it again. I have a reference, and so that's how that kind of works. That's the big thing that people don't understand. We can't perceive of what's there. There's no way. You have to experience it. And there's so many ways to experience it, but we were going to talk about too, about sensing. You call it astral travel. At one time, that's the way I perceived astral travel, but now I call it sensing. And they gave me the easiest. This is what's funny, is they gave me the easiest method, and it's very, very difficult for most people. And it always cracks me up because it's so simple, but you have to just let go, right? You like sense a warm ball going into your skull, through the body and out the feet. And you do that over and over and over and over, right? Until it's not part of something you have to think about, because thinking doesn't work, right? And so you've got this ball, heated ball that moves through your body. Now, as that's going on, you keep that going on, and you recall something in your mind of unconditional love, that you experienced a memory of unconditional love. And it shocks me too that a lot of people go, I don't know of anything unconditional that's happened to me. And it's funny because we all have. So I'll mention, first thing I do is mention a pet. Oh yeah, right, and so they do know. And then I tell them that take that moment while this ball is going through your body over and over again. You start thinking of this memory that you had of an unconditional love moment, and until suddenly it becomes real. And when that becomes real, this doorway is in front of you, right? But it may not be what you perceive, because, well, like, the best way I use this is my homerization. When we pray, right? Every prayer is answered, but we don't always feel that it's answered. But when we do feel that that prayer was answered, we think it's a miracle. And that's what's funny to me, because every single prayer is answered. But people have this habit of controlling what they want, right? And so when they're praying, they use all these words, and it distracts them from what they're truly asking for. And what they receive is exactly what they needed, but they don't recognize it because it's not really what they wanted. It's what they needed, right? And so there's this thing that we defraud ourselves, in a sense, of actually experiencing what's happening. So I always tell people when they pray not to say anything, right? Just let it go. You already know what you want. You don't have to create any intents. Intents is always kind of humorous to me, because we've already created the intent. Why do we have to duplicate it again and again and again, right? We don't. We just need to let it go. But that's the hard thing things are so simple, right? That we complicate them. We think that we have to fix them.
Right. And when we keep recreating the intent, that shows that we're not trusting of the process, because we're just
Yeah.
continuing to ask for the same thing over and over, not believing that we have it already.
Yeah.
So that's a great method, and I'm going to use that. And my immediate thought when you said unconditional love was my pets, because I love animals more than I love people, and everybody knows that. So I was just curious, what is their opinion of us? I mean, I know they think we're monsters. You've already established that.
Yeah.
But well, first of all, where is that coming from? I mean, are they looking? I know we were a barbaric civilization at one point in hundreds of years in the past, and to a certain degree, we kind of still are, but we're a little more manipulative about it now. Like, where is this feeling coming from? Where is this opinion coming from these days? Like, have they seen specific occurrences, or is this just like a rumor that's out there in the cosmos that the humans are just this way? Like, where does this whole idea of us being horrible people coming from? Because we're not all that way.
Because we are.
Not all of us, though. I mean, I take offense to that, because I consider myself a good person, and I think I only interact with good people. So I think there's a lot of good people here. I choose to believe that there's more good in the world than bad. Obviously, they're having a good experience with you, so hopefully that changes their mind on that.
It has, in a lot of ways, but it was more about how they connect with us, is what I guess I've taught them, in a sense. But that was because I'm so different than the way other people react, but they understand it, and that way they can understand us better. But we are scary, and I wouldn't interact with us if I was them. I wouldn't have anything to do with us. I mean, like the things that I've been through, for example. I mean, you can't hide that. And you know that each one of us have had thoughts of how we would react to certain situations. And that's the problem, is that until we're able to reach a certain point where we wouldn't have to react, or we wouldn't have to worry about reacting to that in the way that we think that we would have to, then we become a lot less scary. But that is where we go to. We go to the brain instead of the mind. And the brain is so fallible because it has to make stuff up, because it doesn't have a solid reference. Where if we were thinking through the mind, these things would all just melt away that, we experience, and the differences that we have. I mean, they can't even conceive of why you would kill so many living beings. I mean, they put their lives in jeopardy to save other people from natural things. I mean, I got to experience that too with Sam Jess once. And I mean, it's so different. It's hard to explain, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend any of them coming here. I mean, there are specific people that I've opened the door for, and they've been returned, right? And so, see, that's accessible, but as a whole, no.
As a species, we're in survival mode, and we don't have the memory of the experience of having direct contact with ET civilizations, which we all know we've had it in the past. I mean, this is what ancient Egypt is all about, but we've lost that everyday contact with them somewhere along the lines. And so the memory has been taken away from us through generations of forgetfulness. And so we don't have that memory. So therefore it's a foreign concept for us, which puts us into survival mode, which is fear. And so when somebody's in a state of fear, just as you approached Sam Jess in the swamp, you were very careful and gentle and making sure she wasn't going to be frightened. We're kind of in that same state of, okay, well, this is something different. Could this harm me? Could this kill me? And I think we need to normalize what it feels like to be in the presence of another civilization, a galactic civilization, a species that doesn't live on our planets, or even some that do, because we know that they're here already. They're just in different parts of, underground or even alongside of us. Sometimes we've got hybrids that we know walk on the earth as well. So we need to make this more public knowledge so that people don't have as much of a fear factor, so they won't have a big reaction when they do have the opportunity to interact. But I do think there's a lot of good here. I think there's a lot of amazing people that do great work. Look at what you're doing with the children. And so the fact that you're going to this extreme to put yourself in harm's way to save the children is incredible. And, that is very honorable work. And I did want to ask about that. If they are such an advanced civilization, did they go through this period of time in their history where they grew out of the phase that we're in? And the way that they live and what their civilization looks like today, is that what we can look forward to as we progress as a civilization?
It's possible if we survive. Like they've kind of their primary focus on children, and because they're not pre-programmed, they haven't been in that existence for long enough to find the corruption within it, right? And so they focus more on children. And when they teach them these things, to be more, right, to activate that magic and such, they advise them they cannot be teachers. They just can only do this as an example, and not to be seen as an example. Or, don't go out there and say, "Hey, look at this," but allow other people to witness their magic in a sense. Of how they live and be, because positive attracts. And so what people will end up doing, it's like the 100th monkey sort of thing. They see this and they want to emulate it. And once you enter that circle, then there's no really going back, because it's so blissful, right? To be in that mind and then be in that consciousness. But because of all the things that we go through in our life, I call it a program. We can't let that stuff in, because that makes us vulnerable. And see, that's like when I was on the ship, I was 100% vulnerable. I had to be that way. I had no choice, or they would throw me out, right? Sort of thing. That's why I say that we really are monsters, and we are very violent. And that's the way they need to approach us. Think about if they gave us a water generator that everybody could use around the world and never have to worry about water again. Do you think it would ever get around the world?
I mean, I already know there's technology that exists, like zero point energy, that we don't have access to today. So I think a lot of things are being suppressed, unfortunately, based on a smaller number of people that are at the top of the food chain right now. Yeah, and money has a lot to do with it too. Money and power.
So we need to change the consciousness before we can accept them into our lives, in a sense. At limited basis, yes. Anybody that's willing to go that far is accepted. They're invited, right? But like I say, that simple sensing thing, right? People just have a really struggle to do two things, two simple things: remembering and have a feeling. So it's emotion and love that have to be expressed. And people have a real difficulty with that. And that's where we are right now. And that's what needs to be evolved out. but they have to believe, and they have to trust, and they have to love. And you think about those 3 words, they're very simple, right? Until people try to apply them, and then it all goes to hell.
Right. Yeah, we definitely have some work to do in those areas. So we have to put our attention on that and try to grow our consciousness. I want to talk a little bit more about them and how they live their lives, because I'm always curious about this. We have our daily life routine here. Some of us go to work, and then we have our obligations with our families, and we go to barbecues on the weekends. We go out to comedy clubs or what have you. Did they have those kinds of things that they do? Like, I mean, I know they're on a ship, so it might be a little bit different for them, but maybe on the planet they're from, do they laugh? Do they tell jokes? I mean, I think you talked a little bit about that earlier, but do they have comedy clubs? Do they dance? Like, what do they look like physically as well? I've always heard that they're extremely attractive, which then begs the question, well, then why are we so unattractive compared to them? What happens there?
Let's go further back than that. On their planet, as their evolution was occurring, they were like separated, right? Islands. And then, at one point, islands would start to meet each other, through inventions, boats, that sort of thing. And then as that grew, there was also some tests of like monetary systems and barter systems, like you would imagine. And they just didn't work out very well because they were too happy to share what their knowledge was with the other people. And so it got to a point where, monetary and barters doesn't need. They were all there to help each other and expand each other, right? And make their abilities better and easier life. And so they never really got caught up in the dynamics that this our Earth did. I think it was because of the way the lives began here, the evolution that was created, which is nothing at all what science says. That's all garbage. But anyway, so they had to, rely on each other. And so their daily thing is their work, right? It's their video game and stuff. And it's expansive because it's constantly changing. And they love this stuff. And they're still doing what they did back then. They're doing things to share. Like when they terraform a planet, which I got to witness from the beginning to the middle stages now. But what happened was they found a planet. They wanted to terraform it because they wanted more to provide more space for more people or species. So the very first thing that happens is it's identified, and then it goes to, there's no galactic unification or anything. That they have realms, and those realms will have sort of a political section, which isn't really politics, but they're the delegates. I call them the delegates. And I've used my word, the federation, but it's, none of those things will really apply, but it helps you to identify it. And so what they did was they identified it. They wanted, the Plejarians wanted to terraform it. So they sent it out to the delegation, and then billions of people, if not trillions, of these people that do all this study, right, started to work on what species would be, in other words, natural law. So they can't change the planet in a way that it wouldn't become on its own. But they can speed up the process, right, to get it to that space, wherever it was. So they decide on what that direction would be, because it could be multiple directions. They figure out what kind of species will be on there as far as animals and stuff, in order to perpetuate the growth and the harmony of the planet itself. And what is it going to provide for, and what species? They try to figure out the most amount of species that could live on that planet without assistance, right? In other words, just thrive on there. And then, so this is initiated by one little spark, right? And the delegation, it hits the delegation, and then it spreads out. And their Wi-Fi is a lot more expansive than ours, right? So people that are interested in this and want to participate in it all do, everybody. And they, within a week, they had a plan. What this planet's going to look like, what species are going to be on it, and everything, all in agreements. That quickly, they're able to do that. So when you ask what do they do, right? As a day in and day out, they're always fascinated by extending or learning more about something specific. Either enlarging something that they're on, a path that's lonely, or a path that's already been done, and they want to change what that is. and they absolutely love their life doing that. And about 2 times a day, they'll spend about 20 minutes relaxing. But also, what I have found since I've been there is that they love gossip. And anytime there's something that distracts them from their work, they're all in. And there's this planet, or beginning of a planet, that was created. Like, they'll terraform a planet, but they also can create planets. This one I call flat Earth, because right now it's still kind of flat, and through millions of years, it'll collect other debris, creating a spherical object. And so it's really cool what they've done and how they manipulate it, how they keep it in a trajectory, or whatever you want to call it, in the place within the solar system, in order for it to collect what it needs to. This is a primarily plejarean planet that's being created, right? But you wouldn't know that if you were on it. It kind of reminds me of Arizona, kind of a deserty and kind of a Sedonish look, and then all this other stuff that goes on this planet with forests and beings, little animal type beings and stuff, but nobody lives on it because it's more of a ceremonial place. Now, Sam Jess has special permissions. She can pretty much do whatever she wants. And so one time I said, hey, why don't we have a night out, barbecue, go to the lake and stuff like that. And they were unfamiliar with this. And it was kind of funny at the beginning, because I told them what we would be needing to go there and spend the night there or whatever. And when I got there, the shuttle was like full of all this crap. And I go, what's this? This isn't camping, And so I had to and it's kind of funny, the dynamics that go on between us. And it's just funny to, yeah. But anyways, it got down to bare essentials. But when I first mentioned, hey, let's go camping, I'll show you what camping is, everybody's on board, or hey, let's go do this or something, and everybody's on board. And it's hilarious when Sam Jess goes to speak somewhere, somebody finds out, next thing you know, there's a million people trying to witness this event, right? Because they're looking for the distractions. And there's this group of women that we connected with. I call them girls, but it was one of the first people that Sam Jess actually met when she went to public, right? And basically, they're entertainers, and that was because you choose what it is that you want to do, right? And there was an experience with one of them, right? When we were with them, they helped us do something certain in an incident that we needed. And then later I used them as a reference for something else. And next thing you know, they're kind of part of the family. Well, they're entertainers. That's what they chose to be. So that's what they do. And one experience I had with them, this is really cool. When we went to all these gaming things, and I got to play like some of the games. They actually do have games, right? And one of the things was we went into this other area where all these professional dancers were out there, like on a TV show, right? Where the whole high school is professional dancers sort of thing. And I'm watching all these people do these dance moves according to these tones that were being emanated from the tourist girls. And so Sam Jess was with me and this other lady, and they said, okay, we'll go down there and dance. And I go, I don't do dance. I said, you want me to do a form or Tai Chi, or something like that? I said, I can do really well at that, but I can't dance for some reason, They go, don't worry about it. And we go down onto this thing. It looks like a disco floor in a sense. They had all these little squares and they were lighting up and everything. And so we get in line, or get on in this long line and stuff, and we each touch each other. And so I'm standing there and I'm trying, I felt like I was in a cowboy dance where they do all that line dancing and stuff, and so we're all touching. And as soon as the tones start, what it does is these tones, I forget what you call it, they press upon certain parts of your brain, causing muscle movement. And so basically I became a professional dancer during this song. And that's part of what they do, these tourist girls. They do other things, but that's their job, right? And so to create like music that makes you move to it, and it's beautiful. But then there's like the tourist girls. I mean, the ones I call white girls, that are the servants that were assigned to Sam Jess. And at first I thought, this is kind of weird, right? You have people that are in servitude in a sense, but it was their choice to become that, to serve people. and to make their lives better. And they absolutely love doing these sort of things. So when you talk about occupations and things like that, this is them. And when you talk about, all you got to do is create a distraction, hey, can we do this? Suddenly everybody's on board, right? I mean, it's like, oh yeah. So they can walk away from their work at any time, which really doesn't work.
Well, I think I know some white men who probably need those tones to be able to learn how to dance. So maybe we could use that down here. Okay, so when it comes to the jobs, and I've this has come up in other interviews I've done where I've heard this before, that on other planets and other societies, that they can just kind of pick what they want to do as a job, and that's, they kind of go in that direction with their learning process so that they can create their career, if you will, out of it. But then I've heard other people say, well, then, like, if we were to do that on this planet, like, who would clean the toilets? Like, who would pick up the garbage? Like, how would we get certain things done that most people wouldn't want to choose to do as a profession? How does it work for them? I mean, I know you mentioned there's those few people that were in a servitude position, but are there other jobs that are just jobs that people wouldn't really want to do, but they choose to do it anyway? I mean, how would that work for us?
A lot of it is technology. They can use the technologies to do almost everything, and the things that are purposeful in the sense of us and our safety and things like that, they create life. For instance, I'm an astronaut. I actually got to fly one of their pods, right? And it took a while, and I had to bend a lot of arms to get there, but I actually got to do it. And one of the neat things is that when you're in this thing, like if you see a UFO, right, a lot of times you'll see a fuzziness around it, and not always, sometimes it's camera, but you will see something like that around these vehicles. It's the PI, what I call PI. And that is this being that they create, that its sole purpose is to serve the person in there. And in other words, not really to do a whole lot other than when it's needed. In other words, it knows me and my frequency. And so it really knows me, right? That's why I call it personal intelligence. And so one time I was to follow Hans. I'm still a little nervous when I get in there by myself, because it's like there's no dashboard, and basically you learn muscle movement, right, in order to control the thing. And so Hans wanted me to follow him and stuff, and he's kind of a trickster. Of course, I don't know where he gets that from. I never do anything to him. But anyways, when I was following him, I said, what if, you stop and I'm still going? And I said, I might forget what to do. And he goes, it'll never happen, because that personal intelligence will seek or see that danger prior to me getting there and avoid it. It would do what I would do if I was ready and thinking, right? And if I was wrong, it would actually correct my fault. So like toilets, when you get in there, they come available to you, and when you leave, they're not. And everything in them is also taken care of. So when you talk about certain types of jobs that there's no real benefit from doing other than a service, those are all automated in some fashion or method. But those things that have a personal touch to, they all have very much pride in exactly whatever they choose to do, and they become very, very good at whatever it is, whether it be mundane or something very intensive.
Yeah, we've heard some other people who have had interactions with UFOs or UAPs saying that it's really powered through consciousness, and that the ship itself kind of has its own understanding, and it's also a part of the person who's guiding the ship, like that they're actually two in the same, that they're usually, the ship is derived from the person itself, so they share a level of consciousness. And so that's fascinating, and that kind of syncs up with what you're saying. And I'm thinking, if we had cars that did this, like, we would never have car accidents, because the cars would know to avoid certain things. So hopefully that's the next evolution for us down the road, is to develop something that has that not AI, but consciousness in it, that can determine what it needs to do to stay safe. And another thing I know that is similar to what they have as far as, well, you have clothing, of course, and they have clothing as well, but what is their clothing like? Because again, similar to the consciousness, from what I understand, that clothing almost is sort of conscious itself. It like has its own abilities kind of built into it to kind of keep the body cool or warm it up or whatever it needs. What did you find out about the clothing that they wear?
Well, now the regular plejareans, it's quite different. It's more similar to us, but there are advanced things, about cooling and regulating and monitoring and those sort of things. But like on the ship, like when I go into like a pod and I'm going to wear one of their outfits and stuff, and same like when we were on the Vulcan planet, we went swimming and they painted a suit on us, right? Like a skin suit. But it was funny because I go, they say over here, put one of these on, and I go over there and they're all for little people. I mean, like this tall, and I'm going, how does that work? Right. And they say, just put them on. So, you take your clothes off and I put my foot in one. I'm thinking it's going to be a struggle, and it's not. It's as though that I'm putting on a regular pair of pants because it's living, it moves, right, in a sense, and the shoe expands to fit my foot. And as I pull it up, is I don't really have to stretch it, just by the inertia of me lifting it, it's expanding. And then and it just sort of comes across. There's no Velcro or anything, but that's what you would assume, right? It just kind of comes together. And then I know the place to touch in order for it to open up. And so it's basically fits your body, as well as the helmets, that attach this part of the suit, and you get your helmet on, it grows into it. And so that it's completely sealed. When you don't wear the helmet, they have their regular suits. They are very similar too. They're very small until they go to put them on. And then when you take them off, they shrink back down. So.
Wow. It sounds like magic.
Yeah.
I would love, like you were saying earlier, where Sam just changed her weight when you picked her up. I think every woman would like to have that ability. We would all appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's a way that they attune their bodies. There's a lot of things that they can do that is unseen, and there's not enough of it for me to ask questions yet. Of course, I've started to understand that we don't, like, the mind and brain is a very significant thing. Like their hemispheres are blended, right? And so one of the things that the lady, snake lady, that's on there, one of the ship on the ship, she is rather spiritual, and she helps me a lot through different phases. And she taught me about life, and I didn't even know she was teaching me about life. But basically, it was a way of fixing me, right? Because I had these, like, they witnessed me doing a rescue, and there was a horrific thing that was occurring, and they didn't see any emotion or feel any emotion coming from me, and they were concerned because that damages our bodies, right, and our minds. And it was my way of dealing with achieving the mission, right? And that's the way I trained myself and was trained. And so she took me through a process along with this other being, very spiritual being called Mother, I call Mother, where they took all this out of me. And it was like torture, right? And they did it through pressure points and that sort of thing, of how they directed it out of me. And then once I was in that position where I had been, cured in a sense or whatever, I didn't notice a whole lot of difference at the time, but evidently they had removed all this stuff to me to prep my mind or my brain for the ability to become blended. Or in other words, women come from emotion first, men come from a logic first. Each equally is of value, but even better when they're combined, right? So it's like blending the two hemispheres together. And so then that's when Snake Lady took me into the pool, and we went down these very deep areas, and we'd have places that we could pull out. There were tunnels that we could get into that would shoot us back up to the surface and such. And each time we stopped would be when I couldn't go any further, and I'd duck into this little like opening, right, where it was air in there, and I'd get in there, and she would teach me a new lesson about the cells, how the cells of body or a being created, what the evolution of them over a period of time, right? Like the 3 days, right? To be considered human or a being, a spiritual entity of consciousness. And so as we went through that, she was basically reprogramming my ability to understand life and consciousness. And by the time we got through it, it was like something coming in from where I didn't know from. So then I started to understand that when I think with the brain and I don't have the full picture, I need a reference, right? And so the brain is survival mode, creates what, like I was talking about earlier, whatever that main memory was that wasn't complete, then the brain expands it to keep us from going insane, to fulfill that memory and to complete it. Even if it's horrific or if it's good, it just recreates it. Well, when you start coming from the mind first, then any reference is pure that is sent to the brain so that it has a proper one to create a true memory. Now, when you come from the mind first, what you do is you experience everything fully. When you're doing anything mundane, or you're to the park, or you're with wonderful people and stuff, you fully experience that. And it's so hard to explain because we think that we experience things in its entirety when we really don't. We don't even have a clue of how much you can experience when you're coming purely from the mind, which is unconditional love. And so if you don't have the answer to something, like you go visit the pyramids and you take in all that experience, don't question things you don't understand, because what's going to happen, this is very difficult for people to do too, is the answers to those other parts that were missing will show up. You don't know when. It could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a year, but it's guaranteed it's going to get to the truth before the brain can. All the study that they do is going to lead you down so many paths, you'll never find the true answer. Where if you allow the mind to do it for you, it will come, and then your brain will have a reference to it, and you'll have the understanding of something that's true.
Wow.
That makes sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. And I could see meditation being a big part of that process too. Just being able to relax the brain so that the mind can do the job that it needs to do. On that topic, when it comes to biologics, how is their body put together, similar or different than ours? What does their reproductive system look like? And I've heard this before from someone else who actually has an ETContact experience, where the brain is one hemisphere versus the two separate that we have. And the way you just explained it is makes a lot of sense to me, as far as how it works together, and the fact that it's probably more beneficial that it is connected. But what about the rest of the body? Like, do they have a heart and lungs and a liver? And do they have the pituitary gland and a third eye? Do they have all the same things that we have in our system? And what does their reproductive system look like? I know we talked a little bit about how the children are born, but are they like taken out of the womb of a female to put into these vats, or are they birthed naturally? I mean, what does the process look like for all of that?
I'm limited to that, but it's because I didn't need more. But they don't have sex, but they're capable of it. Their bodies are, there will be certain very, very rare, like a tribal type thing, where they'll have sex once and the woman is pregnated that one time, but they don't understand it a lot for most part because they don't experience it. From my understanding, they have, like, I think it's intestine. They have less intestine, and they excrete a lot of their through their skin. But I've never felt it, and I've never smelled anything from it. But other than that, I've seen all of them buck naked, and there's hardly any difference. Very, very little difference. So they look like us, except for the eyes. When I bring them here, especially Sam Jess, I brought a lot of places, but the eyes are quite significantly bigger than ours. But if a person wasn't paying attention, which most people aren't, they would never notice. The female gene is constant in the aliens, in the future, everything. It's kind of funny because I took her to the mall and when like her first time, and where did she go first? To the clothing store, and and then she
We like our clothes.
as she's watching people, she noticed earrings, and so she wanted an earring. And I said, well, kind of described to her what that is. I said, the clip-on kind, or the kind you pierce. Oh, I want the pierced. And so I was like, great. And then for $20, I found this place that give you a free earring if you got the paid for the piercing. So they're so similar to us. I didn't think anything of it. And she had these sunglasses that she created, right? That they wear when they come down here. They're not necessarily sunglasses. They look kind of like gargoyles or whatever. But when you look at them, directly at them, the eyes don't look any different. Plus they're shaded, and so nobody pays any mind. So we go into this one place, and I'm kind of, like whatever I say on when they're here, they do. When I'm with them, I do whatever they tell me to do. I don't question it. And so I thought, I think we can pull this off. And if not, there's all, reasonable explanations. So we go into the store, and the lady there was just really nice and everything. And she commented, Sam Jess, on how beautiful she was and everything. And so, I told her what we wanted. And so when she pulls her hair back, their ears are a lot like narrower than ours. And she goes, wow, that's interesting. And I said, yeah, she's Norwegian. And she goes, oh, it's been a long time since I've had a Viking in here, and so that was good. And then as far as the sunglasses, I told her she needed to leave those on. We just got back from the eye doctor, and she goes off, oh, yeah, I've been there, had the eyes dilated. She goes, that's not going to be a problem. All I got to do is have that ear. And so, little things like that. But and for a long time, it was hard to understand what is the difference between us and them, other than they fly spaceships, and what are they doing with me, right? And so I kind of thought at one time I was their pet, come to realize that actually they're my pets too, because what I get from them when I'm with them is watching their amazement at what I'm showing them, right? Whatever it may be, or or they're experiencing. And I started to realize that's what they get from me. And like when I first met with them, they said we're all equals, no matter what. Everybody is an equal. No matter what you think, it's an opinion, because each of us are absolutely perfect. So I kind of started to figure that out. And then as I moved into the mind, I can see so much more of who they are, rather than just guessing.
Yeah. And is their skin and hair similar to ours as well?
Their hair is like monofilament line. If like fishing line is what it reminds me of, but very, very fine. And it has a different texture than ours, but it's still soft. Also, it can be manipulated. It's not necessary. It doesn't have to be blonde. And like, there's a difference between the Plejaren people and the people I met, the lab people. The best way to put it is like military, right? They don't have a need for defense or anything like that. So, but that's my way of understanding. They work for the government, right? But there's no government. So it's a uniform sort of thing. So you'll see them in different classes. Like when I first met her, she was in blue, and now they're in white because of the elevation of their status, so to speak. And where was I? So like their hair, they can change it. But like the people that I'm around, that's part of the government, it's blonde, blue eyes, right? For the most part, not all of them. But if they choose to change it, they can. But it's sort of the trend. Now, when I go to a colony or the Plejaren planet, in there they'll have a multitude of, because they're entertainers, they're all these other things. It kind of reminds me of being back in the 80s, right? With all these
The big
incredible
hair.
hair color and so I mean they're just so they express themselves so well, but and it's beautiful.
And when you are traveling and there and you're visiting their planet, are you getting a lot of looks? Like, do people look at you like, oh, we know that's a human? What do they think about you?
Well, when at first it was limited to my exposure to specific types of people, and they were they understood who I was, and there was still the thought of we're not a planet of or a people that would fit in within the realm. Not many people do. Not other alien races either, just specific ones. And so at first it was kind of a, we'll try this and we'll try that sort of thing in my exposure. And then it got to be, like Sam Jess is like a rock star in a sense. I call her the queen because basically that's what she is. Because she doesn't have any power, but whatever she says, people need to pay attention because the people adore her. They see, like I had kind of compared her to like the Princess Di, how people just loved her for whatever reason. I never understood it, but that she's the symbol, right? And so she speaks for the people. So she's kind of like a rock star. Wherever we would go, she draws a lot of attention. So we have to take precautions in that in order for her to fulfill whatever it is that she's doing. But at other times, like on the Plejaren planet, we'll come across people who recognize who she is and stuff. And it's just like, we're all friends and I'm accepted. The books that I write have gone through, they have to go through them to look at, to say, you can't say this or something, which isn't very often, very, very seldom, but they've also become a part of their culture. Like how I say they like a distraction, right? Oh my God, it's like Sam, Jess, and Z, these sort of things. And so I've kind of gotten a free pass card on a lot of stuff. But so, yeah, it's very limited, but yeah, I have free will there.
We're our own predator here, of course, but I've heard that the reptilian species is a predatory species out in the cosmos. Did they have any natural predators that they have to be careful with? Or is there sort of like an understanding out in the cosmos that like, hey, we leave you alone, you leave us alone?
There's a lot of different looking type characters that you could assume that, that they're reptilian or whatever, but they're still humanoid. And all of them I've been able to speak to that are part of the realm. The realm is basically made up of species that are interstellar, that have the understanding of travel and things like that. And it's all based on natural law. Nobody will divert from natural law that's interstellar, because it's like you find the path that's positive in every possible direction. There's no purpose in going a different direction. That's also about like when they talk about people making hybrids or whatever. Just imagine you take a teaspoon of dirt along a game trail. You can have 40 species DNA in that from thousands and thousands of years. And like when I presented this with the one I call Hans and the other one Franz, it does represent though.
I was wondering, I'm like, are we getting this from Saturday Night Live?
Yeah, I did, because when I first met them, they're like inseparable sort of thing. And they're both big and strong and stuff like. Anyways.
Do they pump you up?
Yeah. They are comical, but I asked them about that, about changing species and stuff, and it's basically against natural law. But if they want to create a being, they have the probability of doing that just with the DNA, and they don't need a being to do that. They can go collect the DNA nearly anywhere. I mean, they can get it out of the air in some places. And so they can create the species that way if there was a need for that. But I asked them about changing us in other ways and, to make us better or something. And they say that is a possibility if we had that ability ourselves, right? To do that or evolve in that direction, they could alter that in that sense. But to change somebody, no, they can't, because there's a very spirituality amongst these people, and they don't want to infringe upon that. So yeah, so I've it's just my experience though, right? That's what I'm saying. This is my experience. This is what I witnessed. Not that I can't be wrong about it, but every part of it, every cell in my body, it makes sense. It's like, because see, that's the thing I was talking about, is there's so much that is we've never seen or understood before, and they have. And so a lot of times I'm walking in there without words. I can't explain it because it's not part of our language. I see colors within the quantum when I travel, from here, which is a whole nother story, but I see colors that I've never seen before. And how do you explain a color you haven't seen before? But it's there. And it's like when you're in the quantum, you're surrounded by quantum fluid that's invisible until you recognize it. Once you recognize it, then it becomes color, right? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of near-death experiencers say the same thing, that there's colors on the other side of this 3D world that we live in that we just don't even have names for. We can't
Oh, yeah.
even fathom or imagine.
Apply that to everything.
Yeah, right.
Body, breath, air. I mean, there's so much out there that we have no knowledge of.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Let me ask you about the food. What did they eat? What was their food source like?
That's really fun. You touch the wall in a certain place, right? And it would create whatever it is that you were seeking, and they can add to the menu in a sense, but it comes in these little gray balls, and it's like, it's like, this is what you want me to eat. And I said, I don't even know what this is. Right. It's kind of comical, but like, most of it's kind of, just whatever is there, but I can choose like a certain flavor or something like that. Anytime I ate any of these things, it was like, oh my God, I'm awake. I mean, it was like, it's super nutritious. Right. And, I later found out how that worked, but like, to advance in the menu, they kind of put in my own menu. So I can get these gray balls that are like steak, right? If I say steak, I want steak flavor. When I put it in my mouth, it's as though I'm eating steak, not just the flavor, but the texture, everything. And, I learned later too about the animal sort of thing, or meat and that sort of thing. But first, let me tell you they took me to a colony, which is this huge cylinder in space. Hundreds of thousands of people live within that. And when you're inside, depending upon the size of it, you forget that you're in a cylinder in space. You think that you're actually on a planet like on Earth or something, because of how they create the water flow and the rivers, the forests, and everything contained within it that creates its own environment. Well, up above where they have the energy collectors, which is another neat thing, is how they my introduction to it was, there was it looked like an old scientist with a lab coat on, and he had this little square box that followed him around, right? And the box was actually like a robot, and it would assist him in the guy that was attending these trees with these little fruits on it. And so basically they collect these fruits, and when they're ripe and stuff, and then they can put them together and create these little gray balls that are full of nutrition. And to eat the actual fruit was mind-blowing. It was like everything come alive as soon as I bit into the thing. And then Hans is there, and like I said, he's always messing with me and stuff, and he's, put your fingers in the soil, put your fingers in the soil. So I put my fingers in the soil, and I pulled them right back out, because it felt like something was grabbing me. It's because the soil was actually alive. And they collect these different mixtures of soil, and they put them in this where they can grow these plants in a very short period of time. And as they ripen, that's why these people go around and choose them by hand. It's not necessary that they would have a being collect these, but it's what they want to do, right? Because they want to be in touch with that vibration or that energy. It's just so satisfying. And so anyways, that's just like one form of it. Now, speeding along and going into another thing, on the colonies, they have these things on the big colonies, like the cylinders, is they'll have these like a mall. I call it the mall. There's no monetary system or anything, but it's people with certain expertise. Even on planets, they'll have these where they grow their own gardens, where they don't have to be involved at all, but they do because they want to. And then they take it to town basically and allow people to choose, so they can get the raw thing rather than, purchase it, or getting the other sort of foods, the gray balls, get bored, right? So anyways, I was with one of the tourist girls, and so she was really fun. She is an entertainer, so she was extremely fun to be around all the time. And so she asked me what I wanted to do. I said, can you get real food here? And I had to explain what real food was. She goes, oh yeah. And so she takes me to what it's like a restaurant where this guy prepares food for you. He actually puts it on a plate and stuff like that. And while we were back there, and she introduced me to the guy who created the foods, which he was a very happy person. Well, they're all happy, but I pointed like to her boots because I was kind of curious if he's going to make steak and lobster for me. Where do you get this leather from, for your boots? And so she explained to me it's not conscious that they grow it. They're able to grow meat. They're able to grow leather in its form as leather. They don't have to create the animal and then create the leather. But and so they can create that. And just like with the lobster tail, they grow the tail. They don't grow the whole being, and it's not conscious. And then the steak was done, explained to me the exact same way, but he created it in its rawest form so that he could prepare it for me, and he needed a little instruction, but he was that was his thing, right? That was his hobby sort of thing. So he was able to create that for me. And it was like the best thing ever. And anytime I eat their food, I get so hyped up, so excited. I still have this calm state, but my body just feels so alive when I eat their foods. So that's
it sounds like it's such a humane way of creating nutrition, because right now with meat, we slaughter the animal. And I always think about the fear that's instilled in that animal prior to the slaughter, and that creates adrenaline, which then goes into the food that we're consuming, right? So this would be so much more of a humane way to do that, and also to give nutrition to the body as well. It sounds like this place is magical. Like, I think these are the kinds, anytime I hear these stories of these other civilizations on other planets, I'm just always like fascinated. I'm like, why are we stuck here dealing with this stuff that down here, I wish we could just make a quantum leap into that way of living a life, because it sounds like it's a lot more easeful, more graceful, just a more loving way to be. So I'm a little jealous that they get to live like that, and we have to do the daily grinds down here.
I have experienced higher levels here on Earth, but it's because of what I've learned from them in the experience, right? They're teaching me the tools that allow me here to find those things without even looking for them, right? I just naturally move towards those directions. So, there's good and bad in both. I understand why we can't be a part of their society. We're just not ready for that. I mean, some of us are, like you said, right? But finding them, there's not that many that's willing to do the things that I did. I was willing to do anything. Not at first. At first, it was going to be this quick experience, in and out, and I'll have something to remember, right? And then the love, I just have never experienced the level of love. And it's like, how I wasn't in a position where I could even question it. It was like when the Plejaran people are used to touch and feel and all that. The people like the ones that I met, the lab rats, I call them lab rats, that they were very formal. Touching wasn't a real thing. Their social aspect wasn't very good either, because of the type of work they chose and things like that. And so I introduced like a handshake and stuff, and then I introduced hug. Now it's almost annoying. Every time I go to the ship, I have to hug everybody. And again, it's that thing about you give it an eternity. And the way they explained to me is that this is like a way of catching up on the love that we had missed since the last time we saw each other, which could be a lot. If it's 10 minutes, if it's 2 days, if it's a week, it all's the same. It's a matter of catching up with that love or the experience that you had with these beings. So it's kind of it. I kid that it's annoying, but it's kind of funny because when I'm in there and you hug these people, the feeling is just, you don't want it to ever end, but it finds its way to complete. It doesn't end, but it does complete.
It's like that person that just hangs on a little bit too long when you're hugging and you're like, okay, we're done now.
Yeah.
We can separate. It's funny because there's another guest I had who has contact with an ET civilization, and she said that they introduced the concept of birthdays to the people that they're in contact with, because obviously they live so long, they don't quite have the birthday celebrations that we have here. And they thought it was such a cool concept that they introduced it on their ship, and now they all celebrate birthdays because of that. So it's funny to see how we can influence them and they can influence us. So it sounds like a similar concept with the hugging.
Yeah, I introduced birthdays. I introduced because that was kind of funny. The way that came to be is when we were trying to understand me and Sam Jess's similarity in our what do you call our bond, and that's how we actually found out our two planes of existence had crossed or merged, and we inhabited the same dimension, which is the dimension being life. And so that was we're not brother and sister. We're not related. We are the one, right? Just from different planes of existence is the only difference. And that became a quantum entanglement. And I explain that in the book, how that's defined. And so, yeah, where was I going with all of that?
Just the customs that we adopt from them and vice versa.
That's how we introduced the birthdays. And then since then, I've done Christmas and these different things, even bike night. You know, when I have bike night, I take Sam Jess. It was hilarious, the experience that I had the first time. And now she's addicted to going to these bike motorcycle events and things like that. On fireworks, I took the whole family to fireworks. And so, but most of them are very uncomfortable here. And Sam Jess is, I mean, she's all in. And then the Vulcan people that I had met, which we hadn't talked about, but the reason I call them Vulcans is because of the similarity in the face shape and such. And so that's how I would remember them, right? And anyways, they lived here. They're not advanced as the Plejarendiaries, but nearly so. I think it was 1,500 years more than us. But they lived here for like in the 60s, I think, for a little while. For several years that they lived here and worked here and existed within us. And they do have kind of a pointy ear, but you wouldn't notice it, but you would ask somebody about it. It was kind of like that. So there was a way they disguised that, and so that they could exist among us. And the funny thing is that they were going back to relive their ancestors about cooking and stuff like that. And this was the closest representation. Earth was the closest representation of that, where they could find that experience. And so that's why they chose to come here and live here for a while, to understand that a little better, their ancestry. But I asked them one time, hey, you ever see Star Trek? You know, and they said, yeah. And I says, was it a comedy or a drama? And they said a little of both.
I was wondering the same thing. How much they relate to it.
Yeah.
That's really funny. So when they come down to this planet, I know you just said they spend a little time here at one point. What's the longest time frame they're able to spend here before they have to go back to their own environment?
They could exist here forever if they wanted to.
Oh, okay. I didn't know, because I've heard other species, can only maintain their vibration for a certain period of time because we're in such a low density. So they would have to go back and kind of regenerate, basically.
That would depend upon their natural environment.
Right. That
because see, I can go to their planet. I could live on their planet forever. It's not the same as Earth's, but it's very similar. If it was different, then that would be a different thing.
Okay. And do they sleep?
Like 20 minutes. The only word I got for is meditate for like 20 minutes twice, like in a 20-hour period. So yeah, they don't necessarily sleep though.
So do they have homes then? Because I mean, that would be probably the main purpose of a home, but do they have homes that they live in, or what does that look like?
Like we were talking about earlier, they don't really, most people live off planet. But like in the Plejarendian planet, for example, I know about that one. I don't know really about a lot of the others, but I think they're very similar. Is they're allotted land, right? And which is kind of neat, because right now Sam Jess just chose to take a land and build a home on it. And so there are those who do live on the planet and live in a home that, which is really cool how their houses are. It's just like living in the forest or something, but you're not. You're actually living within something, because they have this material, like, and they built a room for me on the ship, and it has a loft, and on the top of the loft, they know how I just love to stare into space. So it has a ceiling about 3 foot above the bed, and you don't see it. It's a glass that's stronger than steel that, you don't see it. You can't, I mean, you can bump your head against it not knowing that it's there, right? And they do the same thing with like the walls of the house and the shape of them, so that if you're walking towards the house, you may not know that you're walking into a house, and then suddenly you bump into it, right? And so they mark, in a sense, a way of marking where the entrance is, and things like that. But inside, it's completely environmental. Like, they'll always create a stream. Most everybody has a stream that goes through, and it looks really natural. And what they're doing is they're bringing up groundwater and allowing it to flow, and they create this little flow of water so that they can bathe in that. And then they can also, they put their plants and stuff and trees inside of there that bear fruit and such. So you never have to leave your house. You can, you have this, you can sustain your life. But they'll have like rock walls that, you think, I mean, they're there, they're inside. So you forget that you're inside of a house, you know, in a container, in a sense, because of the flowers and the gardens and everything that's experienced there, and the critters that come in. And there's a controlled environment that keeps out certain insects and stuff. But at times they need insects. So they allow for the certain insects to come in order to work with whatever it is in the environment, right? The same with animals. Some animals are free to come and go, but you know, it's just incredible the way like your room and stuff that they have in there. They're like hidden, but it's like cave cutting into the cave and things like that. You can sleep under the natural light, but there's a ceiling above you that you don't see, you know. And I mean, it's just, there's so many beautiful things that I write extensively in my book about.
Okay, you brought up animals several times, and that's one of my favorite things on the planet. I love animals. I know you've shared a story, and I would love if you could share again about the experience that you had regarding introducing cats. I thought it was funny that they were scared of animals and they were scared of cats. And I'm like, it's just a little kitty. It's like, it doesn't do anything. So if you don't mind sharing that story, I would love to have people hear that.
Yeah, there's a lot to it, but essentially, so I was showing them cat and dog videos, and they liked both cats and dogs. And I kind of explained to them, well, you know, a cat would probably be better in a situation like this, if that was ever to be, that you would bring a cat up here, you know, or a dog. Dogs won't work so well. And that cats, the intelligence of cats would also be of a benefit. And so, one day I got them. They really liked watching it, but then the thought of actually meeting one or touching one was not really in the program. And I kind of talked Sam Jess into it one time. And so we went to one of the big stores, and where, you know, you could see the animals, you know, they have them behind a window and stuff. And so, you know, she's looking at them and everything, and she's getting kind of comfortable, and she understands that there's a partition between us and them. And they were just, you know, killing her with kindness, right? You know, how kittens do and things like that. And I said, so would you like to meet one? She goes, oh, no. And I said, look at that. Look at that. And this one just kept looking at her like this. And she goes, okay, I think. And so I got one of the workers there to help me. And I told her, you know, she would like to visit with this one and see where it goes from there. And so they took us to a little fenced in area, you know, where they could let the pet down. And so I told Sam just to sit there, and she was petrified. And so it was funny. The lady starts coming out, and I'm expecting her to bring the one we picked out. And she brought a whole bunch of them, of the kittens. And
Which the rest of us would be like, yay.
Right. And so the lady drops them, and then she says, I got to go away. You can call me if you need me or anything. And she goes, but I need to go over here for a moment. And I said, that's fine. And so Sam Jess is petrified. You can see her like stiff as a board in there, and they're crawling all over her legs and things. And I told her, I go, lay back. And she kind of looked at me, like, are you kidding me? And she's watching them, and I can tell her starting to loosen up as she's watching them, but they're crawling on her. So she lays down, and they just start crawling all over her and everything. And then one of them comes up and puts its head against her and starts purring right next to her ear, and she just sort of melted. And she got to the point where she was very comfortable with them. And like when they would claw her, she would freak a little bit. And I says, it won't kill you. Trust me, it won't kill you, And so she existed with them a little bit. And then it was time to move on. I mean, she could have been there all day at that point. And so I watched this transformation go through her, right? And I says, you know what? They got that exchange policy. If it doesn't work out, you can bring it back and everything. And I just thought, is it worth trying, right? And I go, okay. So I told her, do you want to take one of these to the ship? And she goes, I want to take all of them. And it was like, come on, calm down. See, this is like where it's hard to distinguish them between us, right? Because I'm talking to another human being, right? And she's just like addicted to them now. And I said, no, one. And my rules go, right? So we got the one, and we took it up there, and the whole crew was petrified of this monster that was on board. And it was so comical to watch. And then one of the other ladies, Laura, she's like Marianne on Gilligan's Island, right? Everybody loves her. And she's like the mother to everybody and everything like that. And she just fell in love. Eventually, the cat became hers, and we called it Kitty. And we kept it, of
Very
course.
original.
Yeah. And she created these things where the cat could naturally go by the wall, and it would know where to stop. And these like butterflies would come out of the side of the wall. And so she would like be swatting at them and everything else. They're not real, of course, but the cat doesn't know any difference. And so she created a lot of these things. And then like where she would eat and where she would, use the litter, she created these places on the wall. Like anytime I go into a room, there's no furniture, and there's a place on the wall that you touch and you concentrate on what it is that you want. And that's what is created in the room. Well, she had created these along the hallways, and where the cat would know where food was and where this was and stuff. So it could do that. And it got to the point where I started getting frustrated. It's like, how is it that every time I touch the wall, I'm touching here, and, trying to find the right spot, and the cat just walks up and does it. Well, later I find out, oh, she's talking to them. She knows how to communicate to them, right? And
Wow.
like I was telling you earlier, how the tone, right? And the rhythms of the tones. And anyways, so since then, we've gotten another one, and they've adopted very well to the place. So
they could be creating their whole colony of cats on their ship now that they have two.
Well, there's pets, like the Vulcans had a pet that was very similar to a cat, but and they live in a home rather than in space. And but they got that. But Laura's room now is like my Cat from Hell guy, where he's got all those creations, the ramps and the tunnels up on the ceiling and the roof. That's Laura's room on the ship now. I mean, it's just cluttered.
It's
and
the
there's
cat
also,
room.
Yeah, and there's also
She's become the crazy space cat lady.
Yeah, I call her the cat lady. Yeah, she's got two of them now. So. And it's funny, when I took her and Sam Jess down to get the second one, and we went into one of the shelter places, and I had picked out 10 so that we weren't there very long, and that she could choose from. And there must have been 50 of them in there, right? And she's going from one to the next, and it was like I had to drag her back over. And then there's Sam Jess running off this way. I said, focus on these, right? So we could get out of there. It's like a
kid in a candy shop.
Yeah, exactly. They would have lived there, and they would have taken them all. So
that's funny.
I guess it was lucky I was there. But yeah, so yeah.
What kind of cats did they end up with?
Well, there's no breed. The one is like it's got black, and then the white chest and white paws or legs.
Oh, I think those are tuxedo cats. They're called tuxedos.
Yeah, it was similar to that. Yeah. And then the other one, Luna, is the other one, and it's more like the ones with hair rather than fur. That breed. But it was very soft, and Yeah, and she's kind of an orangish brown, kind of remind me of like a lion or something,
Oh, well,
or a
I'm glad
bobcat.
that they like their kitties and they're enjoying them.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Now, I did have a question. This is a little bit off brand, but I'm just curious if you have any feedback on this. I mean, obviously, on this planet, we have a lot of people that have a lot of illnesses, not just physical, but we also have mental illness. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, is that something that they experience in their culture as well? Or have they figured out a way to kind of eradicate the mental illness from their society?
That's what I was talking about earlier. How when once those cells are put into the test tube or whatever, they can identify any defects, and they will repair those.
Mm,
So no, they don't have that issue.
yeah. I was just wondering because I often think how can we help remove those challenges from our society? But then I also wonder, are we meant to have that as a challenge that helps us grow, helps our consciousness grow? Because without challenge, there's no growth. And that was one of the things I wanted to also ask about because it sounds like they live this beautiful life with very little challenges. So how does their consciousness continue to expand? Because we know with challenges, that's how expansion occurs. So, I mean, I know that obviously they've expanded quite a far greater amount than we have already, but I would assume that there's still more to achieve. So, how does that work for them?
We've already got the solution for those mental problems and stuff, and that is to come from the mind first, because it's the brain that's damaged, not the mind. And there's a lot of examples of that, like these autistic kids, how far they can go, right? And the mental abilities, and that connecting to the mind avoids all that. So we already have the solution. There's almost no repairs necessary to their genes anymore because it's pretty much gone from their society.
Hmm. Okay, so hopefully that's what we have to look forward to then as well at some point.
Yeah, just move to the mind and not the brain.
Hmm. Yeah. And what dimension would you say they live in?
Well, a dimension is actually an aspect of oneself. So that's been really ruined over the years. In the beginning, you have certain points you can figure it out, but it's an aspect of ourself. Just like in a dream, all the people that are in our dream is us, you know. And the idea is how it's presented to us is in a way that we can understand it. So, like for instance, if take anybody, George Bush was in our dream. How to decipher that is that because that's me, right? That because I'm everybody in my dream. And so, well, who does George Bush represent to me? Right. And then that's the aspect that I'm looking for in that. So when you talk about planes of existence, that's where we live, right? And that's where we come from. And dimension is actually an extension of ourself, which is our life, our projection, right? So when we're projected from the plane of existence where consciousness is to um, the the body or the life that we perceive that's here in a physical form. When in reality, it's just a projection. It's the essence reflecting upon the consciousness. So, um, yeah, that's is that easy to understand?
Sure. I think I may have to listen to that one back a few times to comprehend it, but I think I kind of got the gist of what you're trying to describe.
It's a
Yeah,
catch-all. It's kind of like dark matter,
right.
right? Dark matter isn't dark matter. There's no such thing. And in the same way of dimension, people have so many different terms for it. What are you really asking when you say what dimension, right? Because
Mhm.
it depends who's defining it.
Right. So, I want to jump over to the other work that you do with helping with child trafficking and such honorable work. And I know you've got your own nonprofit and you go out on actual missions to help rescue these children. And I'm just curious, what did the Plejareans say to you about that happening on this planet? And by the way, I've also heard that this is actually an issue in the cosmos. This is not just an Earth issue, that this happens all over the universe, and there is trafficking in general that takes place. What is their understanding, or how do they view what's happening as it relates to that subject?
Oh, any kind of harm is horrible to them. Just for example, the simplest thing, when, I started explaining some of my scars, and I explained to them, because they thought that was so horrific and that would happen to you, in a sense. And I explained to them, little kids fall at the pool, or, like when I was growing up, I'd get stitches every summer from doing something, and you get scars from that. And it was very difficult for them to fully understand why we would do that, put ourselves in that way. Just like when they questioned me about all my scars, how we will put ourselves in harm's way to help somebody, right? And, that's how they finally understood me. And so the concept of that is very difficult. As far as trafficking goes, it doesn't fit natural law. So the people that are interstellar now, like they've explained to me, there are beings out there that are harmful and things like that, but they haven't reached that point of, it would not be allowed because it would disrupt natural law, which is the law basically of being in space right now, or throughout the universe. But those who haven't reached that level yet are still going to go down those roads, and where those things could be possible. And wouldn't even be necessary. According to the science that they have, right? They can create life through a soil sample. I mean, they could go from any planet to do that. It's very simple process. Even I could understand how they do it. And so, I think that just is a lot of other people's experience that may not be full. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but my experience is it doesn't fit anywhere.
Right. Right. Anyone who thinks about it and comes from the heart would agree with that. It doesn't make sense at all. Anytime you have to harm another for your own benefit, that's not the right thing. Now, are
Yeah.
you still in contact with your family?
Yeah, like I say, it's like my neighbors, right?
Hmm.
Hey, what's
Every
up?
now and again, you pop in.
Yeah, or vice versa,
Yeah. Now, what would you say to somebody who might want to have a similar experience and have their own experience of contact?
Like I don't remember which book it was, one, two, or three, but like you have to follow them in order to get a full understanding because they're diaries, right? And you'll miss a lot if you skip. But that simple thing that we talked about, sensing, that opens the door. It's like I understood when I was in the temples and they would teach me, we call it cut my gland here, the sac that
The pineal
inhabit.
gland?
Yeah, in order for me to see fully all the
Mhm.
time, where I wouldn't have to turn it off. And in that process that I went through in astral travel, I thought of it as a limited thing, where I now know it's much more than that. But even though it's still the same, right? The basic teachings is exactly true. When you leave your body and you go to a certain point, right? When you finally are free, you have all these thoughts about where you would go, right? Who killed Kennedy and who did this and who did that? All that is gone instantly once you're out of your body, because what is in front of you is there's so much candy to choose from, right? And in the sensing, there's so many, you can access almost anything through the sensing, right? And so it's like the prayer thing that I was talking about. When you enter into that realm, you you have the access to everything. So when you're doing it from the pure part of the heart, you're feeling the ball going around, right? And then you feel that, or see that moment or memory of unconditional love, and you repeat it until it becomes real again, and you're actually there. That's when this doorway opens to everything that you ever could have imagined, and you'll know where to go from there, right? And so that is sensing. But there's also many other things that's part of the sensing. For instance, like Sam Jess was trying to explain to me how they can communicate, right, to others. It's not telepathy. I haven't really witnessed anything like that, but some people have labeled it as that. But for instance, she's with this alien called Tom, and she loses her car keys. This is her example she was giving to me. And Tom was there at the time that she lost her car keys. Well, now he's a billion light years away, right? And she could easily access him, through different methods, but she can just sense him, right? Now, when she senses him, he may not be aware that she's asking him, where are my car keys? Do you know where I left them? Well, if he would answer it when he was in front of her and being fully conscious and everything, then she will get the answer from his subconscious. He may or may not know that he's actually talking to her at that moment, but he could be conscious of it and, be sharing. But in other words, if he would have given her the answer regardless, he would give her the answer through that sensing. That's part of sensing. In other words, it's a connection of the consciousness where our essence is touching this puzzle board, right, of consciousness is always connected to other consciousnesses, right? So you have one big conscious, but each of us that are playing a part as a projection is linked in that consciousness. That's how sensing works. That's how what I used to believe astral travel was. But it's a much more than what I understood then. Now it's so huge. Huge,
Yeah.
I tell you. Huge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you go into great detail about this in your books. And I actually have your book 1 right here, which unfortunately I just got it recently, so I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm definitely going to. The Plejarendiaries, Accidental Contact by Zaysan. And you have 11 books now, which is amazing. And you were telling me that you wrote these books because all of your friends kept asking you about your experiences. And you were like, okay, let me just write a book so I can just not have to repeat myself. And here I am asking you to repeat yourself. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Z. Once I heard your story, I just knew I had to have you as a guest because I know our audience will really appreciate this information. And I so appreciate you spending the time with us. We took up a lot of time today going through it, but I felt like it was really important information to share. And so I'm going to put all of your links in the description of the video so people can find you, find your website, they can find your YouTube channel, your Facebook page, and they can buy the books as well. And I would highly encourage people to go on Amazon and click that link and get those books. I'm going to read number 1, and then I'm just going to follow through all through 11 after that. And then we also talked about your other organization, which is your passion project, where you go out, as we mentioned, and help save the children, which thank you so much for that. We need more people doing this type of work. You have a nonprofit titled endingchildsexslavery.org. And since that topic is sometimes a little taboo here on YouTube, what we're going to do is a separate video just specifically about what you do with that work and how you actually go out on missions and help and save children. And we're going to put that on Rumble. So I'll put that information in the description once that's ready to go as well. And just before we wrap up, Z, do you have any final messages or words that you'd like to share with anyone listening today?
Live long and prosper.
It's a good one. We all know that one. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much again. It has been such a pleasure talking with you. And I really appreciate you sharing your story and your experience with us and your energy. And thank you for all of the work you're doing to help with the children. We need more people doing this work. So we appreciate you.